are now live.
Good morning. Thank you for all attending, and I will not be running this quite in the same way as a normal cabinet is run. It will be much more relaxed than that, hopefully. Therefore, I hope as many people as possible can speak and who want to speak, but I will limit you to a maximum of 3 minutes, otherwise we could be here tonight and it's going to get really hot. So, I have apologies from Dan Thomas, and Susan Coleman is substituting. Thank you. Could I have declarations of interest that are not already declared, please? Right, okay, thank you. So, I'm going to change the agenda slightly in that we will go into public question time and do those, but I think the sensible thing around elected members and those in the audience who want to take part, elected members in the audience who want to take part, I will move that into the substantive item so it becomes part of the whole debate, okay? So, in fact, item 5 will then go into the future of Shire Hall, which is sensible because they all sit together. I will ask for a presentation around from Duncan Whitfield around the paper. I will ask Chris Buss to talk about his appendix that you will all have seen and read. And that will then go on to taking questions and so on from elected members, the answers, and any other statements that we want. I will allow Cabinet to actually ask you questions around that so that we can get a full and frank discussion going around those questions and those statements that people make. And then Cabinet will close that down and we will go into a full debate on where we're going to go with the whole thing. Okay? Right. In which case, can we now please move to public question time? And we have Jonathan Owen with us. So could Jonathan come to the table? And if you press the right-hand button on the microphone, we will be able to hear you. I wonder, Jonathan, if you could sit on the end. Yeah, because then we can all see you.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And nobody's looking along the table at you. So if you would like to introduce yourself and your capacity of being here, please.
Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Jonathan Owen. I'm a local council taxpayer and resident in near Oswestry. My particular interest, I own and recently retired from a company which is a development consultancy, doing commercial and retail development work, and I'm aware, having recently moved back to the county, of the history of the Shire Hall debate, and I'm very concerned that some commercial evaluation is necessary in view of the disastrous state of the council's finances, and I'm genuinely surprised about the lack of commercial appraisal which has gone into the process as far as I am aware. I'm also a supporter, incidentally, of a local campaign group, Save Our Shire Hall, with which you're doubtless very familiar, and I'm a proponent of the reuse of commercial and civic buildings for all sorts of reasons, environment included. So, shall I go on to my question and perhaps ask for a response from whichever member feels qualified to comment? Could the council, or could a member confirm what is the council's, and what is the council's estimate of annual operational cost savings if its operations were consolidated into a refurbished Shire Hall. The purpose of the question is to try and draw out the commercial viability supported by the potential cost savings, which I'm concerned will be lost if the opportunity is not taken to actually enter into a joint venture to refurbish the building, which is ideally suited for that purpose, and thereby enable the council to achieve significant operational cost savings. So, over to you.
Roger Evans will reply to you as the portfolio holder.
Thank you, Chairman. As a Cabinet for Finance, I've just got one sentence down for the question.
Yeah.
The information you've added now, but my answer is in answer to the one sentence question that is posed, because there are a limit on the number of words that anybody inserts in their question, and in this instance there's only about 12 words in the question. My answer is, my apologies, this information is not available. The previous administration decided with little notice to move out of the Shire Hall in the autumn of 2024. With the work carried out to minimise the building's running costs since, it is not possible to provide the answer, not unless spending a substantial sum to move back in. We, of course, do not have any capital to enable this work to be carried out, nor, due to previous redundancy programmes, the staff to work out an answer to your question. The Council's approach is now one of a hub and spoke, locality-based working, with services delivered closer to communities, the Guildhall serving as the primary civic base, and family hubs established across the county. Against that model, Shire Hall is surplus to requirements, and the question of consolidation savings therefore does not arise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, well, you're talking about cost savings, we're talking about the information not being available. I'm surprised that nobody has done that there is not available a costed appraisal of the two options and a review of previous decisions made by previous administrations, given that the extent of the problems which the council faces at the moment. If that is the case, the Cabinet took it upon themselves to ignore the report of the Task and Finish Group, which was produced, which was instructed to actually come up with options. My reading of the situation is that recommendation is going to be, the Task and Finish Group's recommendation is going to be ignored. So, my supplementary question is there a costed development and valuation to compare the options between demolition and residential development, or savings which could be achieved by consolidation? I think you've largely answered that already. If so, is it available for scrutiny? I think you've answered that as well. And if not, will the council be now commissioning an independent assessment of the situation?
Can I reply? If you read the report and you read Chris Buss's report, I think a lot of that is covered in there, because actually we are now in such financial status that actually MHCLG are looking at everything we spend. So the report covers most of that, as does Chris Buss's appendix to that, because it was a desktop study. Roger, do you want to add any more?
It is not possible. The council has no money. It has been emphasised in the reports that's been presented to the Cabinet and to council. We are borrowing money, many millions of pounds, in order to operate this council. It is not possible to start spending money on the Shire Hall with no end use in view, and there isn't one at present. So thank you, but the answer just is not possible at this time. And the report, as mentioned by the leader of the council covers a lot of the answers to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the next question is from David Kilby, Shropshire Playing Field Association. Really the Shropshire Unison Sports Club at Shire Hall, and our new monitoring officer, Richard Phillips, will read.
Thank you, Leader. Would members state clearly what the intended future is for the Shropshire Unison NALGO Sports Club at the Shire Hall, Shrewsbury, and associated car park, and whether the whole sports area is currently protected from future development by way of a covenant or fields in trust deed of dedication? In answering this question, could members be clear as to what is included within the site's boundary line? For example, social club, cricket pitch, tennis courts, bowling green and car park, and be clear on future access points to the grounds.
Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. The area declared surplus to requirements by full council in February 2022 within a marked boundary is the main Shire Hall site as set out in section 4.5 of the Cabinet report. The Unison, Sports Club, sports pitches, bowling green, Overspill car park and Lord Hill's column all fall outside that area and do not form part of the disposal, and no decision on their future is taken through this report. The precise red line boundary for disposal will be confirmed through title and boundary due diligence and set out in the marketing prospectus which is being proposed today and be available in the autumn. That exercise concerns only the extent of the land within the area already declared surplus. It will not bring those excluded areas into the disposal.
Thank you. I presume we don't have a supplementary. Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to Philip Scoggins, read the council chamber in Shire Hall in person, of which I actually have quite an affection, but there we are.
Good morning. I am the chairman of the planning committee of Shrewsbury Civic Society, so it should come as no surprise that the question steers towards the architectural. The Shire Hall is the major monument to post-war modernism in the county. That's the words of Pevsner, not us. And Shrewsbury Civic Society believes, and I emphasise this, it should be retained and reused pretty much in its entirety. However, we and many others, including, in our experience, most of those who otherwise disparage the building, see the council chamber as particularly noteworthy. A quirky structure of great character that enlivens the streetscape and acts as a symbol of local democracy. If Shropshire Council were to make the disastrous decision to allow the Shire Hall to potentially be demolished, what safeguards would the council put in place to secure the retention of the council chamber for the public use and enjoyment of this much admired feature of the town, and to allow it to enhance any future development on the Shire Hall site?
Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. The official answer is this. Cabinet is not being asked to approve demolition. The recommendation is to move in principle to marketing, with the prospectus options returning to the Cabinet in the autumn. Proposals from interested parties may include full or partial retention, refurbishment or redevelopment. Can I add, from a personal perspective, I understand your comments about the council chamber, and when I was first put onto the Cabinet, argued that we should try to retain it. But circumstances now are such, and has been highlighted in recent financial reports to the Cabinet, that is just not possible. But we will see what comes forward in answer to the prospectus which is being created and will come before the Cabinet later on this year.
Okay, I have a supplementary following on from that, and indeed to the marketing that was mentioned there. Although there is mention in the report of joint ventures, mixed use and reuse of buildings as options. The report, and I quote here from it, will confirm the preference for the site to be utilised for housing development. My question is simply why? Why instead can't the preferred option, or imperative, even better, be to retain and reuse existing Shire Hall buildings as part of any future scheme, whether developer-led or joint venture or whatever, rather than just another housing estate, which until recently Shropshire Council seemed very keen to avoid, rightly so. Such a preference or imperative could encourage a more imaginative, mixed-use, genuinely revitalising scheme for the area, with a more environmentally friendly outcome in line with the declared climate emergency. I'm not sure why the council would have a preference mentioned in the report for today for housing when itself didn't have that preference a week or two ago, and which everything else seems to suggest would not lead to a particularly interesting or worthwhile or even possibly profitable outcome.
Thank you for your comments. Maybe the Section 151 officer may cover some of it in his introduction shortly when we get into the motion and the debate. I do not differ very much with it. However, there are external people looking at the council and saying to the council, we expect you to dispose of your assets in the most manner to raise money so that the emergency financial strategy, which is what the council is having to adopt and borrow money, is minimised. So there are no red lines around what happens to the site. It's whatever comes forward, and it will be as general prospectus as necessary for those who may want to purchase a site to make that decision. We do not want to hem them in to any previous or prior decisions.
I think Cassandra Polizzoides, who is the service director for Place, would just like to add to that.
And thank you for your question on officers' behalf as well. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? And thank you for your question on behalf of officers as well. Just to point out that the report does also say that there are additional preferences outside of housing. And that includes what I know were previous discussions that were had and that the Task and Finish group had also put forward. And those are the healthcare, supported living, and other commercial and social value uses. From our perspective, when we think of going to market for a building like Shire Hall, we wouldn't hamper the market at all in terms of coming back to us with any suggestions as to what they feel that they could deliver.
I think the microphone either isn't working or you need to be...
Turn the maybe I just hold it up. Yes. Okay. So the first thing is that the report does identify that there are other preferences. They're not mandatory. We do that when we go to market because, as was already stated, we don't want to hamper the market from coming forward with what they feel is deliverable. I think importantly, we will say here, from officers' perspective and from a member's perspective, that when we go to market, we will ensure that those are open discussions in terms of the proposals that come forward. So we will be looking to see what does come forward, what options are put on the table, and look at it in terms of all of that we need to look at, whether it's best consideration, best social value outcomes, and the deliverables. But we won't be saying to anyone that a proposal can't come forward for us to consider, and those will be coming forward to members and cabinet to review on merit.
Thank you. I think the other thing, and it will become very clear tomorrow, best value is something I'm afraid that we are bound to for the future, and this council has been very poor at delivering best value, and therefore we are, and I was very fond of the council chamber myself, and the initial decision to go along this path was a really difficult one for me, but we're now in a really difficult position. So we're keeping the decision as open as possible, so that what many of us would actually like might be possible in the future, but we will have to get best value from that site because MHCLG are watching us, and they may well be watching this meeting, which is scary. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we now move on to John Crow, who I know quite well.
Good morning. Thank you for this. Firstly, could I just draw up a bit of recent history?
Can you tell people why you're here and your association with Shire Hall, John? Because it's quite important.
I'm a member of Save Our Shire Hall, sorry.
And
John
your father
Crow.
was?
What?
And your father was?
Irrelevant to this
No, he's
conversation,
not.
I don't think.
A bit more than that. He
I'm
was.
afraid we're at the money stage.
Yes, I know, but he was the architect, which.
When the council had an architect's department, had a county architect, then over in Common House, which is where they were housed while the Shire Hall was built, and bragging rights claimed, I, as a student and on a holidays job, you got brown, you got fit, you got paid. 7 of us did an all-nighter pouring the concrete on the 4 pilotti that hold up the council chamber. So there we go. Very good. Just to say that Save Our Shire Hall, being a democratic outfit, did survey people on the street in Shrewsbury and in Ludlow, and asked the question, should the council spend a modest sum on refurbishing the Shire Hall, or what was then in the papers, in the council papers, 37.4 million for a new multi-agency civic hub by title on the riverside, and 97.3%. The aggregate from the survey was 97.3% in favour of refurbishing the Shire Hall. Anyway, we move on to where we are today, and my question is, if, as likely, this council decides to sell the Shire Hall and its site, will the council accept the valuation as determined by the Red Book valuation? I noticed there's that element within the report, and as that's question A, and B is what is the minimum sale value that the council will accept for Shire Hall and its site?
Roger?
Thank you, Chairman. The value of the site will depend on assumptions about planning, abnormal costs, building condition, and of course market demand at the time of disposal. For that reason, the council has not, will not, set a fixed minimum sale value at this stage. Any potential disposal will need to comply, though, with the council's statutory duty to secure best consideration reasonably obtainable under Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, supported by appropriate valuation and legal advice.
Have you a supplementary, John?
If you don't mind, Chair, thank you. I just wondered how Council intends to reconcile the position in Chris Buss's fine report that the sale should be uninhibited by any demands from the Council for when in the report for this meeting it appears that there are statements with regard to the previously announced expectations for the development of a demolished site. And I just wonder how that can possibly be reconciled, because you're putting effectively a handcuff.
Roger, do you want to come back on that and I'll add something?
I think that is best to be picked up by officers. Sorry. I think that is best picked up by officers. Members are, under the regulations, need to comply with certain procedures, but the prospectus, when it comes forward, we will look at that and again maybe have a meeting like this to determine what we want in that prospectus to come forward. We must comply with the expectations that we are borrowing money from government at present, or government is allowing us to borrow money at present, and if we do not start to deliver what their expectations is, they could well stop us borrowing that money, which will then automatically mean others will come in and make decisions. We need to make those decisions, so we're using our best endeavours in order to do what the people of Shropshire want, whilst looking over our shoulder at what the government tells us is what is wanted.
So John, just to reassure you, the multi-agency hub is not affordable, is not part of our plan, and went the day we came in to office. So actually your survey was around something that we never supported.
That's since moved on to
yeah, it has. So
4,000 square feet at 20 million quid in the strategic review paper.
Yeah, but we're not going there. We're not doing that at all because we have no money. Next thing is that actually the Shire Hall as it stands is costing us up to £500,000 a year, which we can't afford either. So it's part of the argument that we actually have to take into consideration, because revenue is vital to us all. And it's part of people watching what we're doing. Cassandra, did you want to add something?
If I may, just to say that anything that was previously proposed by the council for Shire Hall, which is in the public domain, prospective developers, buyers that will be within their sphere of awareness. There's nothing from stopping, and in fact we would welcome those joint ventures, developers, partners to come forward and say that they can revive some of those options, and those are the type of discussions that we would want to be having with them. If the market has an appetite to pick up the mantelpiece on those previously put forward proposals, and it's viable and deliverable, those are exactly the type of proposals that we would hope to see to come from market. And if I were to be a betting woman, I'd say we'd probably have quite a few people coming forward that will show interest. It is for us, therefore, to have those open discussions. It's still within our control as a council. We understand the importance of it delivering as much social value and other deliverables that it can. So we need to be having, in line with best consideration, our financial situation under EFS, still those discussions around the wider benefits that a developer can deliver, or a joint venture, or any other model that comes forward.
Exciting prospects.
Thank you, John, very much. I think that was a useful addition. Thank you very much. Right, we have no scrutiny items, and I will now move into the future of Shire Hall. And I will ask Roger to briefly introduce this part, and then Duncan Whitfield, followed by Chris, will do their bit, and then we're going to members' questions, as I said before.
Thank you, Chairman. Today is a special meeting of the Cabinet, and we've been asked to decide on the future of the Shire Hall. We have very good officers with us, and also the consultant, and an introduction to this, and a briefing. Second hit. Today, at this special meeting of the Cabinet, we're being asked to decide on the future of the Shire Hall. We have officers and the consultants that we have employed here today. And before I actually start moving the actual motion that is on the agenda paper, I think it is best, and we think it is best, that they set the scene and maybe say what they're doing and what they are recommending. So can I recommend Duncan, who is our Section 151 officer, to begin?
Could you explain, Duncan, as well, why a Section 151 officer is important to the council in his role? Because actually many of the public won't understand that. And I think you have a versatile role, Duncan. Yeah.
The role of the Section 151 officer is very broad and complicated, but most importantly, the role is to set a balanced council budget every year. And we are in an unprecedented situation here in Shropshire insofar as the balanced budget that we set in February was supported by the time by in-principle agreement from government for £120 million in the year to balance that budget. That's £120 million hole in our budget, which we have subsequently found ways of reducing to 90. Even then, £90 million in a year is an enormous gap that needs to be filled by reductions in spending, efficiencies, savings. And those savings are on a budget which is about 80% occupied by social care. So anything we do by way of savings is endangering some of the statutory functions that we perform, and it's my job to make sure we can balance that budget. In the context of EFS, Heather, I think this is, as I say, an unprecedented position. This is effectively borrowing money to pay for our shopping. And it's not something that we would do with our own money. It's not anything we would do at home, but that is what the government provides us with, is the ability to borrow at cost to pay for our services. So this is a really tricky and difficult position. What it also brings is a level of scrutiny that I have never experienced before from government, from professional bodies, and particularly from government in terms of their options to intervene in the management of our affairs, which is something I think we would all absolutely want to avoid. But their monitoring includes issues like asset disposals, and that's why we're here today, and that's why this decision today is so critical, I think, to the future management of the council. So that's what I am. Also run an internal audit service, apparently, that's and other things as well. It's a great job. So ironically, on the day that the Task and Finish group reported their findings to council back in February, that was the same day when we were agreeing that budget with £120 million of top-up funding from government. I think it's very important to recognise that that was all provisional and subject to an independent review of our financial position. That was undertaken between April and May the 12th, and MHCLG appointed SIPFA to actually undertake that review under a guy called Phil Gibby. We have had some informal feedback to that review, but we are still waiting for the report from government, which is due imminently, and will undoubtedly refer to asset disposals and the necessity of us to dispose of all redundant sites. Those are sites that are not in use or for which we have no future use as a council. The review also made it very clear that our major intention must be to reduce EFS, and with that in mind, MHCLG feel that anything that we generate from capital receipts, from disposals, will effectively offset our need for EFS, and this is a principle that they've applied in pretty much every other council who have applied for EFS previously. The finance member of our recent corporate peer challenge was from Croydon, who had, for example, sold £60 million worth of value properties to offset their EFS demand. So it puts it into some context. So as Section 151 officer and reviewing the options to bring here to Cabinet today in the time since February, including the findings of the task and finish group, I'm afraid from my perspective, it became very quickly apparent that there is only one option available for this site, and that is to dispose of the site to the open market, which will enable us, firstly, to remove our future running costs as a building, which are in excess of £500,000 a year at the moment for a building that is actually doing nothing. It will remove the need for significant investment in that site were it to be brought back into use. And we've had some interesting discussions in briefings on this, but that number, in my estimate, is likely to be in the region of £40 million, given the extent of fireworks that need to be carried out. That's the wrong word, really, is it? Works for fire prevention that need to be carried out, the condition of the building, and so on and so forth. And it will also generate, albeit it may be a marginal one, a net capital receipt, which will reduce our need for EFS. And most importantly, it will receive government, a tick in the box from government, who will see us working proactively to cut into our EFS and get rid of our redundant stock. As we move to the market and maybe take on some of those questions that arose a while ago, we'll seek to minimise any conditions in the marketing prospectus with a specific view of maximising the value of the return, and we will be leaving the scope really to developers and JVs, as Cassandra has mentioned, to bid on equal terms. We will, from that point, that's a marketing prospectus will come back here for agreement in the autumn. And I'll stress again, conditions from our point of view must be minimised. There is a reference to the housing being a preference. In the report, that was a requirement predating the task and finish group, originally from the former administration, then I think updated to include some other elements as well, some other components as well. But the market will be left to choose. And yes, I think it is an exciting prospect to see what the market brings forward. And there's no exclusion to who is allowed to bid. We will, as part of the marketing prospectus, be providing evaluation criteria, but it needs to be clear that those criteria will be based largely on the finances, the financial implications of anything set out in front of us when we get there. So, for the avoidance of doubt, I need to repeat that this is my clear recommendation as a statutory Section 151 officer, and it is very important that we get this decision through Cabinet today, and we can get on with moving towards the future of Shire Hall and the Shire Hall site rather than the history of it. By conclusion, as I was personally with my team reaching the conclusion that sale is the only way, I was very keen to confirm that opinion, and as Section 151 officer I engaged Chris Buss, who will speak to you in a moment, to carry out an independent review on the basis of Chris. I think that's quite a unique combination, and in that time at Wandsworth in particular, Chris was the lead component from the council point of view on the things like the Battersea Power Station development, big developments, and other housing regeneration projects. Since retirement, Chris, relevantly, I think, has acted as Section 151 officer at Croydon as they went into their Section 114 territory, has experience of that and working with government through that kind of intervention period, and also at Kensington and Chelsea in the fallout after Grenfell. More recently, I think, Chris, you've done a lot of work for the LGA, for SIPFA, and indirectly for government with councils who have been financially stressed. So that's the kind of experience that was relevant as Chris came forward to write this report, which is about decision taking and not about valuation. It's about how we get to the way forward in a world where there are clearly many conflicting views on what should happen to Shire Hall and the Shire Hall site. So I'm going to pass over, I'll speak again later, I have no doubt, but I'll pass over to Chris for your introduction, your report, if I may.
Thank you. Can I check that you can all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. The report that you've got before you as the appendix to the decision-making document isn't designed to be critical of previous observations and decisions that have been made by the council, because they were valid at the point of time when they were made and the circumstances were different. The reason why you've got this report before you now with the recommendations that you've got before you now is in particular is because the council's financial circumstances are significantly different. As Mr. Whitfield has said, you are in a position where you are having to borrow significantly just to balance your budget, which is, he said, is like buying your shopping that way. I always regard it as using the credit card. Unfortunately, the credit card has to be paid. And therefore, there is a cost to the council of paying that credit card annually, which is referred to in my report. And that gets baked into your budget for the next 20 years. That's the primary significant difference between the circumstances that the council finds itself in now to what it did in 2022, and even compared to when you made your last set of decisions at the back end of last year. Although you declared the financial emergency, I don't think the truth had actually sunk in at that point in time as to how severe the situation the council found itself in. But basically, as the leader has said, as Mr. Whitfield has said, you are in the position where you have no money, literally. You are borrowing to pay for your services. In fact, all of the previous decisions that you looked at, if you look at the options that you agreed to take forward in December last year, they both would have involved the council having to put money into a scheme. Money that you now have not got. Similarly, the option that was brought forward by the Task and Finish group with the joint venture would involve the council having to make some form of investment, either in terms of property or cash or probably both, and then having to pay for it afterwards. Because if you go into a joint venture, and I have experiences of working in a joint venture. I think, to be fair, the partner in the joint venture's got more scars on it than what I got, but we both paid for it extensively. Is that the private sector will put money into a joint venture if it thinks it is going to get a return. If it's not going to put money into a joint venture if it is not going to receive a return, because that is not the way the private sector works normally. They're not philanthropic. So having looked at the way that the council had made its decisions in the past, which were perfectly valid decisions in the circumstances at the time, having looked at the decisions or the recommendations that were made in December of last year and the Task and Finish group, I reached the conclusion that none of those three options would do the things that the council needed to do quickly, which was to reduce its costs and potentially get a receipt in quickly. All of those, even if they had produced something, you were looking at something 3 to 4 years on down the road. The position that you are in, I can almost guarantee that when you get something coming in from the government, it will say, we will require you to balance your budget in the next 3 years. All of those would not allow you to do that. Therefore, I reached the conclusion that the quickest way of dealing with this, the way that is much more likely to get a receipt for the council, albeit perhaps not as large as what people think that it should be, is to market the site with as little hindrance on it as possible. So therefore, I discarded the option of potentially the council taking the risk of knocking it down first. If there are people out there in the market that think that the building can be reused, they have now got that option of doing that. If the market thinks that the best way of using the site is to demolish it, they have that option of putting that forward. So therefore, the option that was in the old options of potentially the council taking the risk of knocking it down, because if I use the word risk because you can get a price for knocking something down and then they find something that you didn't think was there, and that puts the cost up. It's a 1960s building, almost certainly there will be some things in there that you're not necessarily expecting, even if you think it has all been stripped out. Also, I've taken the view that if you don't put a planning permission for it, normally you would expect that to enhance the value of a site. However, it depends what planning permission that you apply for. Because the council might market it, say with a planning permission, similar to what you were asking for last December, which is a mixed-use site. If that is not what the market wishes to put there, then you will not get the value back on that planning permission, in my view. So therefore, going with a fairly blank canvas to the market and saying to the market, what do you think? What is probably the best option the council's got to try and maximise its value. There are no figures on this. Experience elsewhere that the way to maximise value is to go to the market with as limited number of constraints as possible. As Mr. Whitfield has said, you are in a position where even £500,000 a year that you're spending on keeping that site vacant, you can't afford. Because that's £500,000 that you're continuing having to borrow, and if you don't borrow it, that's £500,000 you've then got to take off services. So it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. I realise that buildings, particularly iconic buildings like this, generate tremendous emotions among people. I have actually been to Shirehall. I spent 3 days there back in about 2019 working for the LJ on something, so I do know the building. I can understand the passions that it generates, but I also understand the fact that the council is in a position where it cannot afford to keep it in its current state, and it cannot afford to redevelop it, and therefore the only option that it's got, albeit reluctantly, I suspect on behalf of a lot of councillors here, is to sell the property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Roger, do you want to just wind us up now, and then we'll move on to questions and statements from members.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming to the more formal, semi-formal, and today at this special meeting, as I said of the Cabinet, we are being asked to decide on the future of the Shire Hall. We have, as referred to, officer reports which contain in section 2 a number of recommendations. Appendix A lists recent formal council decisions, whilst Appendix B is the independent review which Mr. Buss has just referred to, listing various options that have been examined by him as an independent, well-qualified consultant who has in the past years carried out similar work for a number of other locations. As can be seen, our executive directors are also present and when appropriate will answer questions as and when needed. To confirm, I'm not going to make a long speech extolling what's in our options. They are listed in the reports. The recent history is listed, as I say, at Appendix A, and there is Appendix B. To further confirm, the decisions that are made today are being made in public and follows the intention of this council and the administration to make them in an open and as transparent manner as possible. I will concentrate on the future of the Shire Hall. This must be made, though, in the context of where this authority is at present. After receiving reports on the Council's financial position, Cabinet declared a financial emergency last September and set up a series of boards to oversee how the Council operated and managed its affairs. In recent weeks, I presented the outturn report for 25-26 and last week the draft medium-term financial plan. Both these reports show the predicament the Council is in to balance our books and so fulfil our obligations. For the last 2 years, we have had to request special powers from government for emergency financial support, or EFS. This support is in the form of permission to take out large loans that all need to be repaid and will cost this council many millions of pounds in future years. The amounts of these are laid out in the 2 previous reports I just referred to. Section 3.7 of today's report outlines that whilst the options available to the council for the future of the Shire Hall are constrained by our financial circumstances. In 3.8, the report further states that the appropriate government ministerial departments, in agreeing to EFS, will demand that this council maximise the value from disposals and at an appropriate pace in order to reduce our need for further EFS. As was referred to by a Section 151 officer, government have in recent months also sent in specialists to monitor what we are doing to reduce our need. These have now reported back to government and we wait imminently to hear their conclusions. We hope that the measures we have so far taken as our other bodies shows our commitment to make this council a sustainable one, a council which is answerable to the people and run to the people and not run by government departments. With this background, the council is in no position to invest any money into the Shire Hall site. We must minimise as much of our expenditure as possible. Appendix B lists and examines the various options, and within the officer's report, at section 2 of the officer report, are listed 13 recommendations. Chairman, I move the listed options be agreed by Cabinet and hence that further report and recommendations are brought to it later this year.
The seconder, Alex, thank you. And you'll reserve your right?
I'm happy to kick off if you'd like,
okay.
Leader.
And then I'll go to, yes, okay.
Well, I'm happy to second this. I think I should start by saying I'm very fond of the Shire Hall, personally. I live right next to it as much as anything on
So, we're really sorry that we've had a breakdown of Teams here, which means that we have not been online. So we will go back to the start of Alex seconding and speaking to this. So you have missed nothing apart from a trip to the loo and a coffee. There we go.
Thanks, Heather. I won't repeat my Keir Starmer joke, so they've only missed that. So just to get back to the start of the contribution, I suppose where I came from throughout this and going back to the various councils since 2022 where the Shire Hall has been discussed is I'm personally very fond of the building. As I say, I live quite near it and always, or near enough, always have done. I have family who work there. Again, my granddad has would say had a vague memory of the Queen visiting. It was a year after it opened. It wasn't the opening, technically. And the buzz that would have caused in the town. And like so many council officers, he then raised my dad on Highfield around the back of Preston Street. And I think that's quite a common story in Shrewsbury. I know lots of people who've got those links to the building. It's also a building, and when I spoke at Save Our Shire Hall reception on one occasion last year, that I think we need to acknowledge there's a lot of personal pride and links for others. You know, I mean, I think my own mum and dad got married at the registry office there, and I remember going there in 2021, albeit probably a very different Shire Hall to the one the Queen visited, when I was elected for the first time, and, you know, going there as one of the, you know, I think the youngest councillor, you know, that will stick with me as well. So I get it. And I get that there is real merit in that building. I've always really disliked the attempts to denigrate it as a building. It is interesting. It has an iconic nature to it, and I don't think that we should avoid that in the discussion. Indeed, as I go on to the next point, which is about finance and markets and the decisions we have in front of us, I think we'd be foolish to denigrate it. I actually think that there's a good point for us in going to the market and saying, look, there is this interesting history behind this site, and you could do something genuinely interesting with it. But I think often when you get into local politics or government, you expect that you're going to be given a long list of nice, positive decisions to make in your community. This isn't the first meeting where the Cabinet has sat here in the last few months and had to make a very, very difficult decision. We had the day centre closures not long ago where, you know, we had, like we're doing today, this conversation with many of the impacted parents and vulnerable adults and had to square up to that. That is the reality of the situation that Shropshire Council finds itself in. We are not a council which is going to be in a position to invest significant sums of money in projects that don't have a guaranteed return and where we would have to borrow and pay that back over 20 years or so to get anything that might resemble a return, and might is important here. So when the independent report was commissioned and we got it back, I think that it showed a good understanding of the fact that we are not a normal council at the moment, and we are not in a position where we've got that big pot of capital money or that big pot to invest in a site because, frankly, we want to rather than we need to. We are a council that is having to make those difficult decisions and shut services and make changes to the way that services are delivered fundamentally, which most ordinary councils wouldn't wish to do and certainly would hope to be able to avoid. Speaking on the report more directly, Table 1 lists the 5 potential options, I suppose. They are retain and do nothing, which, as we've heard already, costs us £500,000 a year and doesn't really gain any benefit. I think the argument around land value is one that markets have to set, as the 151 and the independent advisor have laid out. I think it's a peculiar suggestion that the state can set the land value of its own asset and then reliably project that. I think history has taught us that that isn't a serious possibility. Then you look at the unconditional sale option, which costs us very little money. It means that we don't have control over that site. It means that the private sector most likely have control over the site, but also I think it de-risks what this council has very significantly. You look at then the conditional sale, which is essentially the same, but again, as has been alluded to, it's us making a decision about what the market might want ahead of time, which I don't think anyone in this room can seriously argue is likely to provide best value on the site independently as per that MHCLG criteria and as per, you know, frankly, some fairly basic financial management. Then we have these options around development agreements and JV Land for Equity, where we'd really be looking at investing millions of our own money, or rather government's money, borrowed with interest on them over many years to potentially look at a return later down the line. But we have this site now which is costing us £500,000 a year, and if we were to borrow an extra £5 million per annum to fund one of these projects, or even just that up front, we would be looking at adding costs of around £500,000 extra a year to our budget. £1 million a year for 20 years to maybe get a return. You know, that is not a sensible decision. That is not a decision that any of us at this cabinet table are going to be able to justify to government when they're making decisions about whether we should even be in control of this council democratically or not. I just think those options which aren't looking at what markets are looking for at the moment and what the private sector is in a position to do, and which cost the council money that it doesn't really have and has to be included in that request to government, these are not serious, sensible propositions. And that's before we get into who would even do it in this building. You know, we all know the problems with our officer corps here. We've got some fantastic directors we brought in lately, but you might notice the word interim in front of a few of these names because that's a position we're in. You know, I'm afraid the days of the county architect are gone. You know, there is no big team of people in this building or working from home or wherever with the sort of capability and capacity required to undertake a large complex project. I'd also say quite a lot of what this administration has had to unpick is the desire of our predecessors to undertake large, complex, expensive projects that may or may not end up with a return. That is really the folly of Shropshire Council over many years. And I think part of why we're in this situation is because of a historic inability to make difficult but correct calls. So the challenge, I suppose, I'd put out, and I'm interested to hear contributions from the floor today, is twofold. The first part is if there can be any solid, sensible argument around the building staying in the council's control, because the number of risks and the level of cost involved is just too high. Where we are right now, the Guildhall, is not an ideal site by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a site and it does work, and we are in this meeting today and the council does function and indeed show signs of significant improvement in many areas. It is clearly not the fundamental to success. The second point I'd raise, though, is if there are people in this room who think that they know what the market wants better than the market, if there are people who think that there are better ways of getting a better return against best value for Shropshire Council, then what are they? Because putting state restrictions on what markets are looking for on these sites is not going to yield a better... I can't see how that could possibly be the case. And I think that if we were a very different council, we would be in a position where we would be able to exert some muscle on that. But we're not. We're in the position we're in. So I'm very happy to second the report, but I do it with a sadness, and I think that there's a lot of that feeling around the cabinet table, just as there was on day centres, just as there will be on other tough decisions we have to make to become sustainable over the coming years. So I'm very happy to be challenged on any of those points, but particularly those two questions. What do we know better than markets, and what could we do to realistically look at having this building in our use? Because at the moment, the numbers and the borrowing involved are astronomical compared to what we could possibly get a return on.
Thank you. That's a useful restart to the meeting. So what I'm now going to do is go to the two questions I still have on the table, and then I will ask group leaders to have their bit to say, and then I will invite any other elected member in the room to come to the table. I would ask, please, that you make a new point, otherwise I will cut you off, because otherwise this could take a very long time. So whatever you're saying needs to be a new point, because otherwise it's just going over old ground. And it's not going to add to the debate by 10 people saying the same thing. Right, okay. The first question I have is from Dawn Hoosman about Charhall redevelopment and net zero.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet accept that demolition for redevelopment would be contrary to government policy and the Council's net zero by 2030 target? Thank you.
Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. The carbon impact of any scheme can only be assessed once actual proposals come forward and their whole life carbon is known. And the recommendation today is to move to marketing, not to decide demolition. Continued vacancy also carries its own environmental cost, of course. The prospectus will invite proposals for interested parties to set out their approach to carbon and the wider environmental impact.
A supplementary.
Thank you. So this is a net zero council that is doggedly committed to carbon reduction. As our group has highlighted, we spend upwards of 10 million per annum on a range of carbon reduction measures, yet the same administration seems perfectly comfortable to make a huge carbon expenditure with regards to the embodied carbon in the Shire Hall, not to mention the substantial carbon footprint of the demolition and clearing that may be required. We must also acknowledge the carbon budget required to house us somewhere eventually, as the administration has already acknowledged that Guildhall is not fit for purpose and only likely to be financially sustainable in the short to medium term. Demolition might not be the end result, we can but hope. But whether a demolition is done by us or a developer, the end result is the same. A 20,000 foot square metre Shire Hall will contain anywhere between 40,000 and 80,000 tonnes of concrete, representing anywhere between 20,000 and 60,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. We know Shire Hall is a very substantially built structure. They don't build them like they used to. So it would be fair to assume a value somewhere in the upper range of that estimate. For contrast, the current Shropshire Council carbon budget... Can
we get to the question?
Yeah.
This is the next question, your follow-up question?
Yes. There is a howl. It's a couple more sentences. For contrast, the current Shropshire Council carbon budget is just shy of 40,000 tonnes CO2 equivalent, so the embodied carbon alone represents anywhere between 50% and 150% of the Shropshire Council annual carbon budget, a budget that is only reduced by 5% a year for the price of that £10 million budget.
There are
so how can
this...
Sorry?
There are paragraphs, these sentences.
There's two sentences in that paragraph, but the last one is just one sentence.
I think we've got the point. Can we have the question?
How can this net zero council even consider producing such an enormous carbon expenditure with no guaranteed monetary saving at the end of the process, while spending an 8-figure sum every year to make marginal emission savings? Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. I must say, us sticking doggedly to carbon net zero is not something I remember. We do that where there are very real cost savings, which we have done at Bishop's Castle and a whole range of other places where we've had investment to actually cut expenditure for leisure centres and so on. So I think you might be referring to the last council who never did anything on it. But can I go to Roger and possibly Duncan to add something, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I repeat, and maybe you didn't hear what I said in my first sentence in the answer. The carbon impact of any scheme can only be assessed once actual proposals come forward and their whole life carbon is known. I'm not in the guessing game. I'm not what if, etc., etc. I'm finance and looking at the present council and what we can do. And I repeat, the carbon impact of any scheme can only be assessed when a proposal is made, and there's no proposals at present. We are going out to the market with a prospectus. I'll hand over.
I feel like, thanks Roger, I feel a bit like the bringer of doom today, so I do apologise for that, but I think in the context of those other costs elsewhere in the organisation, it's just worth us reminding ourselves that we'll be going into budget preparation for next year later this week. And that will involve having to look at every line of discretionary budget that we have, and carbon reduction is a discretionary function. It's not a mandatory function, regrettably, that the council performs. So we will indeed be looking at those budgets alongside every other budget line to find savings. And I go back to the point, for 6-7 we're looking at £90 million worth of funding gap, and we're going to have to start training all of our leashes and making, I'm sorry, some more difficult decisions in this room as we go through the room if we're ever going to get back to a sustainable position. So I think when we're talking about budgets elsewhere, please remember that they are under scrutiny and will be under pressure as well. I just think I need to put that out there.
Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to Councillor Brendan Mallon on financial comparison between the two-track approach.
Good morning, everyone. Will a financial comparison be made between the two-track approach recommended by Task and Finish, i.e. either pursuing a sale or securing a JV partner in order to enable members to make an informed decision? And will a financial appraisal be made to compare the receipt from an immediate sale with the cost of replacing the quote-unquote unfit for purpose Guildhall by joint venture? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, the questioner assumes certain things are going to happen, but the answer I'm providing is the draft MTFP has just been published, which shows that it is estimated more EFS borrowing will be required for the next few years, and I emphasise a few years. The Council does not have the resources in particular to participate in a joint venture as an investing partner. I think that needs to be understood by everyone present. To do so would require even more additional borrowing at a time when the Council is already reliant on external, exceptional financial support, which would run directly counter to its recovery strategy. The Council does, however, welcome joint venture proposals from partners able to bring their own funding, and the marketing process is designed to invite exactly that. There is nothing marked in, there is nothing marked out. The prospectus will show that we are open to any and all alternatives for that site. Thank you, Chairman.
Your follow-up question?
Thank you. I don't think we really sort of comprehend here that there is no fast, clean break as has been described for the immediate disposal unconditionally. In this current economy, I don't see us getting a buyer anytime soon. This is going to take years. Certainly under the economic circumstances, I don't see it happening in the term of this government. And even a new government would take years to turn the economy around. So if you're talking 4 to 5 years to dispose, that's £2.5 million in annual care and maintenance ongoing costs. So we could end up in a position where we're another £2.5 million in the hole, still with the liability of the site not being used and without a buyer. So the question would be, why would we go down that route when we could spend a similar amount of money now to go down the JV route and actually produce a positive outcome here? Because there is no fast, clean break. Why not anticipate that, be realistic about the chances? I mean, at the best at the moment, I could take a pound out of my pocket and offer it to you and say, I'll take it off your hands, and you'd probably say yes, because then at least we get rid of that £500,000 a year. But I don't see that happening, because any purchaser will understand that circa 3.5 to 5.6 million demolition costs. They will price that in, they'll look at the value of it, and they will struggle to make a case themselves to buy it as is. So why not recognise that any of these options, including the immediate disposal, is going to be a cost, because the immediate disposal will not be immediate?
Before we go to Roger, Chris, you've been involved in joint ventures. How long do they take to set up?
The one that I was involved in with a London borough, the one that I was involved in with a London borough took the best part of 2 years from starting to go out to the market to get somebody in. You then, in those days, went through the competitive dialogue process because it was an EU procurement, and then you chose your partner, and then you had another 6 months dancing around the contract document before you finalised it. So at least 2 years then, and that was from having a good idea of what you wanted to do at the start. So it takes time. I mean, in my report I suggested 18 months because it's a bit more of a constrained site, but it's not. it's not a quick process because you have to do it as a procurement.
So it's not a total of 2 years, it's more than 2 years.
It can be. You know, it depends how much
That's 2 years to get
flexibility that you have in your contract or in your procurement arrangements, which allows you to enter into discussions with potential bidders. So if you're going to be very rigid, you can do it in less than 2 years. If you're going to give flexibility, it can take as long as you like.
Right, okay. I think that's an important point because it's going to take a long time, and all that time we are carrying risk with us. Absolutely. And I might come to Cassandra in a minute. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry we're dealing with hard facts now, not what might be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years into the future. We need to make a decision. There are people watching us, organisations watching us. SIPFA has just, as it's been referred to earlier on, has been in. They have reported direct back to the Minister, and the Minister will be deciding on this council's future, whether we retain control and can still manage the council, or whether he or she, whoever it may be, will send in their own commissioners to run the council. We need to take action now, and the reasonable action is, as detailed in the financial plan, is to go out to the market and just see what the market proposes. And the expectation is that that prospectus will be ready to go out towards the autumn. So that is what we are going on. But I don't know if the Section 151 officer wants to come in as well.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, Brendan, the big risk is you get to the end of that 2 year point and that's a contract, that's not a spade in the ground. That's the point where you can actually start doing something serious. You get to the end of that 2 year term and then you find out what the investment is that joint venture requires from the council. That to me is a significant risk and could mean that we spend those 2 years negotiating, procuring, and then get to the point where we just can't afford what the joint venture requires from us. It might turn out a different way. The route we're taking allows the joint venture to come in very early and demonstrate to us that it is the best deal, and carries one of the evaluation criteria for the marketing prospectus will be the risk of delivery from the partner. So it is coaxing out, I think, a lot of the issues that we need to know from a joint venture much faster than if we went through the kind of traditional procurement route. And I just think the risk of going down that track, but mindful of those economic circumstances that you rightly set out, is a bigger risk than the one that we are taking. And that's a point of view. But
I'm going to be really kind to you,
There's just a very simple question, very much relevant to that. If that's the case, obviously I've been talking about the risk of trying to sell it and failing. Is there an expiry date on that sale process if we don't have a viable purchaser, that we then have to start looking at these other options like JV, because maybe that hasn't worked? Do we have that set of circumstances that we will make that decision?
I think what you'll find alongside the marketing prospectus is Plan B. So we will need to know what would happen if we went to market and there were no bids. And then I think there'll be a number of options around Plan B. There won't just be one, but we'll need to kind of set out what that will be. We'll need to do that as much as anything to ward off those low ballers who want to bid low. And they need to know that if the bid is not, realistic, whatever realistic means by then, we will move to another plan.
I think the most important thing here for all of us to understand is SIPFA, when they came in to look at us, knew that we had dodged the decision on Shire Hall. So whatever we do now, we must not be seen to dodge that decision. That does it, but if we have the evidence that actually we can't sell, then that's a whole different ballgame than sitting here and fiddling while Rome burns, because that's what we're doing. Because we haven't made a decision to go anywhere. And that's the most important thing to keep this council safe, both financially, but actually for the residents who pay council tax to us, because if a commissioner comes in, if they do come in, and they will be watching us regularly, and I mean watching us regularly, we have a phone call later today, then many of the things that people really value that are not statutory will go, just like that. So I applaud the point that actually we're going to have a plan B if we need to, but we have to show intent, otherwise it will not be us making decisions for the future. And that's where we stand. Cassandra?
Just to add to what everyone has said, in order to satisfy best consideration going to market, if there was an offer from a social value developer or a development partnership and they came to us and they wanted to see whether we would entertain entering into a joint venture, we would have to look at it. And we would have to take into consideration under best value what the net capital receipt in return to the council would be. So that would be the case to make between a direct disposal, which is potentially on the table, versus the net receipt through a joint venture, which would need to take into account all the on costs, which would be considerable, because that's what would ultimately determine our position. So the honest answer is that if we do have someone that comes to us and says, would you entertain a joint venture, we would need to look at it, and if the decision and the recommendation to council from officers was not to under EFS, but under a best consideration as well, we would need to justify that. So we would need to have a classic cabinet report that looks at the options that were looked at and the reasons as to why we went down a certain recommendation route. And that's how we would be satisfying best consideration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In which case we will now move on to group leaders, and the Cabinet may well ask you questions as we go through this. Dawn?
I'll say something before you put the timer on me. We're all aware really that that today is about giving us a damn good listening to. And we saw you do that for the very difficult decisions about Helena Lane and Aquamira.
I think this is all part of the speech, so can we...
No, it's not part of the speech, and
well,
cutting me off in this way
point.
Is really, this is more important than those things and affects many more people than that, but I'm being completely cut off, shut down over that question. You very kindly gave Brendan some leeway there. I just asked for a little bit for me as well. I also now understand that you get 3 minutes and I don't get a leader's speech at the end, so I will have to do that to press and online separately afterwards, because it is still something that needs to be said. It's just I find it disappointing, because I was very impressed by how hard you worked to listen to the people that came to speak to you, but I'm not getting that same sense, particularly towards me today.
I'm really disappointed, Dawn, because I bent over backwards to make sure that this was not a cabinet meeting where nobody else had a chance to speak. If you would like me to remove that chance, well, that's fine. You have made a political speech. I am more friendly to the opposition than anybody else has ever been, so I will not be reprimanded on this. It's only, did never offer you an end of speech as a group leader. We always do this at the beginning.
Sorry, I clarified with an email and it just said and I assumed and was as well.
It was an assumption. You didn't come back to me. It was an assumption and not what I said. So, could we start our 3 minutes, please?
I met with the CEO and leader of the council when this started back in... Oh, sorry, it didn't press. Right, I met with the council and the leader of the when all this started back in December. I said that democracy doesn't just need to be done, it needs to be seen to be done. Part of that is showing that due process has been followed, that every avenue has been explored and evaluated, and that the best all-round decision has been made for both residents and the council. The risk of significant reputational damage from this situation, getting this situation wrong, is extremely high. I've also encountered significant resistance from elements of the council throughout this process. The evaluation was unpopular and things were often made extremely difficult for us. We had offers of free expert advice that have been ignored because we believe the council's mind was already firmly made up and not open to alternative evidence. As a task and finish group, we engaged with outside bodies, external experts, staff and staff via the unions. I arranged an open day and a witness day. This was all about ensuring that we had not missed anything, that every avenue was explored, leading to what should have been a fully justified and understandable decision. We weren't asking the council to agree with us, we were asking the council to engage, evaluate this type of JV opportunity and truly understand it before making a decision. Is this failure to engage not a failure of due diligence? We submitted our initial report in February. Phase 2 was meant to be the detailed evaluation of JV partnership opportunities, but this investigation was taken away from us. An independent expert was contracted. Whilst you can't know another's mind, I believe that this was done to enable the council and administration to politically distance themselves from the decision. We decided to continue our investigations because for ages we knew nothing about what was happening and felt fobbed off. Thanks to Leanne Triton of Don't Waste Buildings, we organised a meeting with a social value development company. If the administration and council had chosen to engage with us, they would have seen how achievable it is to regenerate a whole area with thoughtful and award-winning refurbishments, how creative design can overcome issues around fire regulation compliance, how social value can be added through community spaces, on-site gyms, cinemas, cafes, social spaces, workspaces. But you would not engage, you would not come with us, you would not talk to them, you would not explore the art of the possible. The current administration is new to its role and understandably nervous given the financial situation we're in. The original decision to demolish was made by a previous Tory administration. You are not bound by this. Right from the start, I wanted us as a council to be able to hold our head high, knowing that we had explored all the opportunities, that we had sought best value for our residents and that we had tried everything. Well, I have tried, the Task and Finish group have tried, but I don't feel that the council did. Hiding behind MHCLG and independent experts to avoid political backlash is not right. Today is your political choice. Be honest with our residents. Own it if you must do it. The impending destruction of Shropshire's civic heart will be your administration's, sadly, their lasting legacy.
I will open that up to the Cabinet, please. Could I have somebody? Rob, please.
I do find it quite astounding. I think there's a complete lack of recognition of the financial state of Shropshire Council right now. And if the opposition seeks to be the administration in 3 years' time, I think it's stunningly bad to be saying that the situation at MOCD is used as a shield. This council collectively has had to take out emergency exceptional financial support from the government. We all know what that means. It is costing us, as Duncan has said to us a number of times, 10% on the interest rate. So I take great exception to the fact that we're not taking the decision seriously. I've said before, this is not a decision that anyone wants to make, but it's one that we have to face up to. And the longer we put it off, the more it costs us. So I'm afraid, Leader, I don't have a question, but I do find it astounding.
Bruce, and then Roger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really quite astonished to hear the comments from the Leader of the Opposition. This is a difficult decision, as was the day centres, but here we're talking about a nearly empty building, whereas when we made a decision about day centres, we were having to consider the mitigations for vulnerable people. Now, when we first talked about Shire Hall 12, 18 months ago, we were very excited and enthusiastic about the possibility of supported living for vulnerable people. The reality, though, is that could happen anywhere, and our priority is around securing the financial sustainability of this council. So I really make objection to your comments, Dawn. They're not fair comments. We're not seeking to reduce the political backlash from MHCLG. We are doing our very best to make sure that this council remains sustainable. And this is one difficult decision. I have a lot of affection for the Shire Hall, like others, but this is a head decision, not a heart decision. And I think we're all in this room to make that decision today.
Roger and then Andy.
Thank you, Leader. I won't say that you do not understand arithmetic, but please look at the end of term report the outturn report, which was presented to Cabinet, which will be going forward later this week. Look at the MTFP that's come forward, which shows in stark terms where the council is and the amount of borrowing that is needed and will need to be repaid for the next 20 years. Regeneration. Where is the money going to come from to do it? Are we going to close more centres now to do it? Delay costs more. Yeah, yes, it does. The art of the possible. I was a leader of the group when we were in opposition, and as a person attending cabinets there, we were only allowed 1 or 2 sentences, and were quite often denied any sentences or any comments at all. So it is far more open now than it was before. Hiding behind MHCLG. MHCLG have the authority to say to Shropshire Council, we will send in commissioners, we will take over the running of the council, we will make all the financial decisions. If that's what you want, you're going the best way about it, because we don't. We want to retain control of this council, and as has been shown in the auditor's report, which is being considered later, that 7 years that they have given limited assurance to council budgets, and they've given up one for the last year, finishing last March, but they say they can see changes, and I'll be grateful to see what Grant Thornton say, because they have been saying the same thing. 7 years, limited assurance on budgets. We want to have an assurance that our budget works, and that is what we're working for, not flying kites when there's no wind and trying to see what is possible. We are making the decisions that are needed and should have been made years ago.
Andy?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very fond of Shire Hall. I spent a good year or so working on level 3 of Shire Hall, and a great view of Shropshire, and enjoyed a roast on a Thursday. But the reality is, we've heard from our officers here this morning, our portfolio for finance, our 151 officer, and the excellent report from Chris Buss, explaining the desperate situation that this council finds itself in. You know, it's really astounding that I hear from the opposition that we're trying to sort of find excuses for this, because there's no excuses. The fact is that we owe a lot of money, and we've got to pay a lot of money back over the years, and we simply can't afford to do this. Yes, I'm nervous. We're all nervous, because the alternative is commissioners when we don't have any choice in what happens with this council. So I was listening to one of the officers a few weeks or so ago, and he said just the maintenance alone to keep the building safe costs over £22,500 a month to maintain. Well, that's the interest you'd accrue if you've got £5 million. So unless you can find someone who's been gifted £5 million recently, be able to help us out, I can't see how this is sustainable. So therefore, I'd like you to explain to me how we can keep carrying on kicking the can down the road with this cost of Shire Hall every year.
Thank you. Do you want to reply quickly?
I'm not trying to kick the can down the corridor. This was about process. This was about the agreement of trying. We went out there and we worked. We proved where we were, and we wanted you to engage with us to see what, so that when we sat here today, there was no doubt about what was happening, why it was happening. I fully understand the financial position that we're in. My challenge was about the failure to engage in the process that we have just gone through, 8 months of process, to really make sure we could have all sat here and said, we've done it to death. We have looked at everything we could possibly look at. There is no other alternative. And now it's going to be about trying to find the appropriate kind of buyer. As you say, I do know my numbers, and I fully understand what's going on out there. And I've looked at the valuations that have been carried out, which are quite frankly appalling. How that's going to be a significant net receipt for this council, I've got no idea. Thank you.
No, but it could be a net saving. Thank you. And I do repeatedly remember asking both you and Chris that if you could find a way of covering the yearly spend on the building through your task and finish group, we would have a way forward, because it would be not eating into our revenue every year. that revenue pays for really important services. And you failed to do any of that with any of the figures. So, right, can I now move on to the Conservative group stance? We'll do the task and finish afterwards.
Right. So, Dan Thomas has prepared this statement. I've tweaked it a bit with his permission, and then I'll be doing mine later on. So, thank you, Leader. This is the statement on behalf of the Conservative group. He can't be here today, and he's asked me to deliver the statement. And the group's position is clearly recorded on this incredibly important matter. The future of Shire Hall site is a saga that spans years, administrations and shifting economic landscapes. As we look at the recommendations before Cabinet today, it's vital that we ground our comments in both historical background and our current fiscal reality. First, I want to robustly defend the decisions taken by the Conservative ruling group when we were in administration. The initial decision to declare Shire Hall surplus to requirements was entirely correct given the facts at the time. Post-COVID, the building suffered from massive undercapacity alongside severe documented maintenance liabilities regarding roofing, fire protection and ageing infrastructure. Moving to option 3 in December 2023 to progress a flagship housing development via Quay was a structured, rational approach intended to maximise the site's potential while keeping flexibility for our staff. Those decisions were made in good faith based on the policies, council priorities and economic data available to us at the time. However, Chris Buss's independent report rightly notes circumstances have changed despite the exceptional level of savings made by the previous Conservative administration. Shropshire Council is now in a declared financial emergency, depending heavily on exceptional financial support from the government to balance the books. Because of the complexity of this site, the multi-party task and finish group was established. I want to place on record our group's sincere praise for the incredibly thorough and diligent work undertaken by the group. They gave a voice to local and national experts, they examined alternative avenues like joint ventures, and they rightly pushed for the independent scrutiny we see before us today. Shire Hall is a building that has mixed opinions in the Conservative group. We have members who are strongly passionate about traditional architecture and who see the historic value of Shire Hall and who are desperate to see the physical building saved and repurposed. We also have members who view it as an efficient and sadly a liability. Both viewpoints are fair. When considering the independent review by Chris Buss, taking that report on face value, we do not have the money or the luxury of time. The Council's EFS award for 25-26 as at mid-May amounts to over 22 million per annum in interest payments, and we must ensure that the valuable exploratory work done by Quay and the data compiled by the task and finish are handed over to potential buyers to preserve momentum and secure funding for the building. Let the market take the risk, let the market fund the demolition or refurbishment, and let the council get the capital receipt it needs to stabilise our frontline services.
Thank you, Susan. I now move to, any questions? From the Cabinet? No? Yes.
I note what was said, and I agree. There is no money, and as far as I'm concerned, all information will be shared with any prospective purchaser. There is no secrets or anything like that. We need the best for the people of Shropshire to happen on that site, whatever it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else? No? Okay. Rosemary.
Thank you very much. So I could make lots of political capital about people changing sides, and I remember enjoying time with Roger when we were in opposition opposing the demolition of Shire Hall and so on and so forth. But of course, I'm not going to do that because the realities are the realities. I just want to say that there are many things that can be true at the same time. We can't just take the ones that suit our argument, in my opinion, and the opinion of our group, of my group, the Labour group. Broadly speaking, in our group, there's few of us, but we have varied opinions, but we recognise the building to be of significant historical importance. It has a historical importance in both architectural terms, but also it's significant, if you like to call it, social significance or emotional significance, and that it was built, first big building to be built in Shropshire after the Second World War, and so on. And it is an iconic building, whether people personally like it or not. It is historically very important. But it is also true that the council is balanced on a knife edge in terms of its finances. It has no money to pay into a joint venture. That's clear, and that would take with it not just financial risk, but also all sorts of other risks in terms of nursing a JV through to its final conclusion. Now, I am often criticised for being too optimistic in life, but one of the things I see as a task and finish member, having been a task and finish member on this whole subject, and also as a Labour group leader, is that there are some positives to take from this. So the decision as it stood before the task and finish group did its work was to demolish and replace with housing and a mixed development, including possibly health and other things. So at the moment, demolition is off the table, which for me is a significant win. It's the #1 recommendation of the task and finish group, and I think that's very important. The task and finish also asked for us to start work on a twin track approach. Now, that's not quite what we've got, but hopefully that is what we might get. We also asked to issue 2 market prospectuses, one aimed at a straight sale to a developer for housing and mixed development, the other to entice, hopefully, interested parties into a joint venture. So we cannot go wholeheartedly down an investment route. It's obvious that that's the case. But we are in a better position than that we were in just a few months ago in December. So we can't argue and make grand, or we in our Labour group don't feel we can argue and make grand points about what we would prefer to be done. We would prefer to retain the Shire Hall in the main. But maybe it will take another form. Maybe this is the safest way for the Shire Hall to be protected for the future in a different way through interested parties. And there were many interested, talented, experienced parties who gave witness statements to the task and finish, and hopefully they will come into play at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary, and actually you echo many of my own sentiments, because you will remember I found this all very, very difficult because I like the building, surprisingly. But we are where we are, and here we are. Rob.
I think Councillor Dartler has brought out a very important point, that demolition is off the table with this at this present moment in time. This is about actually leaving all of the options open, accepting that Shropshire Council is not in a position, due to cash, capability and capacity, to do what might need to be done, and actually it has to be left to somebody else to choose what can and needs to be done. It's a reality of where we are right now. It's not the reality I think we would like to have. I think Councillor Dartler and I agree with that, and the same about working with Councillor Evans, but it is the reality we have to face. We can't live in a world that we want to live in sometimes. It has to be one that we have to deal with. So I think that point is really key that you brought out there, that this is about leaving all the options on the table. They're just not going to be options for us because we don't have the space, time and capacity to do that.
Thank you. Duncan.
Yep, thank you. As a building, Shire Hall is modernist, a physical symbol of an era when there was confidence in the capacity and future of local people and local decision making. It seems it will end its life as a symbol of an over-dominant central government, a crisis in local government, and a naive 1980s belief in giving the free market a blank canvas. It isn't easy, but this could have been and still can be avoided. The previous administration emptied the premises at lightning speed. It's not unreasonable for them to leave the decisions regarding its future options for the new administration. But it took until December 2025 for a report to come to council. When it came, we had a plethora of options with no indication a leadership had come to review. I remember well the deputy leader expressing his dislike from another housing estate and his hope for a comprehensive development which retained key features of the building. These comments were made after the declaration of a financial crisis and the submission for EFS. as Mr. Bass has just said, the truth of the Council's financial situation did not sink in, and as the leader has just admitted, the decision was dodged. The months between May and December last year could and should have been used as a resource for the development which maximises social housing by appropriating the land to the housing revenue account. Council housing is not just good for residents on our waiting lists, it's also good for the Council's budgets in saving costs of accommodating homeless persons. And as we are planning to borrow money for 5 years or so, we need long-term, not short-term decisions. Appropriating the site to the Council's HOA would enable us to secure this. Council housing is the original and best investment to save for residents, for the Council and for the country. It's presumably why the leadership have decided housing is a priority. Here is an opportunity to make those words meaningful. The report states the development of social housing could see work start on site in 15 months. Bizarrely, that's seen as a disadvantage. Given the Council's track record on major projects, I think everybody would be delighted to see work start in that time frame. If we had made this decision last May, building work, spades in Duncan's terminology, would be going into the ground next month. It is an advantage because it doesn't delay for contract preparations, legal issues and sale, which, based on previous experience, would take far longer than we predict. Taking the site to market may be costly under best value, going to be hard to find a borrower, and a high risk the land will be simply banked and left to decay. After all the work of the Task and Finish group, we've come down to a consultant's report telling us what we need to do. And we're told that we need to avoid commissioners coming in, but it doesn't really sound like control when commissioners would have gone for a consultant and told you to implement the report, and we've done exactly the same. It is a lost opportunity, and although it may please our paymasters in DCLG, it's not good for the people of Shropshire. I therefore ask the Cabinet to focus on long-term costs to the Council and the community of Shropshire of this site, which could provide much-needed council accommodation by appropriating the site to the HRA to herald a new renaissance in council house building, which would be a fitting legacy for this landmark building. Thank you.
Alex.
I think that's roughly the speech I would have given if the remit was come up with a proposal for Shire Hall unencumbered by reality. You know, the core issue with all of those proposals is that basic financial one. We heard from the 151 earlier, we heard from the independent advisor, you know, we weren't in the position where we put this year's budget together and understood the depth of the EFS need by then. There are obviously merits in using this site for mixed use, if that's at all possible. I think part of what the point demonstrated there is that there are some possibilities for that mixed use. But crucially, those also come with sale and most likely with an external partner demolishing the site or some sort of combination of monies to do that, which wouldn't come from Shropshire Council because there isn't any at the moment. I just think that the core of the decision we're going to have to make today is about whether or not we can exert some level of democratic control over it. The council we inherited back in May 2025, all of us know, most of all Councillor Kerr and the opposition leaders, would not have been in a position to put in a few weeks together a proposal that would be anywhere near spades in the ground by now. It's no use, you know, going over hypotheticals that were completely unrealistic. You know, I might as well say if we demolished the building 25 years ago and turned it into a swanky new estate, Weir Hill wouldn't have been built. You know, these are complete hypotheticals and basically irrelevant. There probably was a financial position for Shropshire where some of these things could have been done, but that point was years and years ago. The fundamental of today's decision and the report that we're seeing, and the question I put at the start really was, can anyone in this room come up with some of those basic solutions to the basic financial problem? And what we're seeing is the debate drift further from solutions to that basic financial problem, not closer. So there is no reason why a sale at open market couldn't lead to more affordable housing, for example. Of course it could. There's no reason why it couldn't lead to investment in health services, in SIL spend, which we would then have to spend on those services in Shrewsbury. But it wouldn't necessarily have to be at the Shire Hall site. And I think that's important. We're not making a decision in isolation, we're making it about the whole council. And I don't think we can ignore the realities of the whole council as is being suggested.
Thank you. Anybody else on the Cabinet? Right.
I think that may be the last of the group leaders.
It is, but then we've got the task and finish group.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Rosemary, yeah. And I also paid gratitude to others of the task and finish group, I'll say it now, on the work that they've done. And if one looks at the list in Appendix A of the report from the officers, you'll see there the task and finish report is included in that, and it will be taken into consideration by officers when they bring forward this brochure that is going to be used. So we will be taking account of all that, and maybe some of the speeches that have been made now. And I look forward to actually seeing that, because we do need to move forward.
Thank you. Susan? You're speaking on behalf of the task and finish group, and we've had a flavour of the task and finish group all the way through this so far. So we've had a flavour of the task and finish group all the way through this, but yeah.
I'd like to start by saying actually that I agree with so much of what Rosemary said. You said you didn't want subjects to overlap, so I'm not going to do the historical stuff, but that's also relevant to it all. And actually, I was the one at the beginning that said to Dawn, oh, for God's sake, let's just knock it down, it's such an ugly building. And here I am now, feeling completely different. So the debate's been presented as a choice between preserving an iconic building and facing financial reality. In truth, the question before us is, what option delivers the greatest value for the people of Shropshire? And are we prepared to dispose of one of the council's largest assets before we know its true value? So you said, Roger, the facts, but the facts are we don't know its true value. We don't know anything really at the moment. The council's financial position is undoubtedly serious, but Chris Buss's review recommended disposal. It offered the quickest receipt with the least capital exposure and lowest risk to the council. It was driven by our dire financial circumstances, not because refurbishment, partnership work or joint venture schemes are impossible. Financial pressure is precisely why we must get this decision right. The prudent course is not to rush into disposal, it's to test the market properly, explore partnership opportunities and fully understand the value that could be unlocked. The cross-party task and finish group was specifically tasked with examining alternative funding models, and it heard evidence that mixed-use redevelopment, healthcare provision, commercial uses, housing and other opportunities. Potentially, this could generate greater overall value than a straightforward land sale, and it questions whether the highest value option has been identified and tested. That conclusion was reached by councillors from all the political groups, not by a campaign organisation. The group warned that the council that it risks financial and reputational harm if it proceeds with the sale before fully evaluating viable alternatives. And potential investors in Shropshire will be deterred by the council's lack of vision and enablement demonstrated by a decision to sell Shire Hall. We need those investors in the future. The fundamental question is, are we certain that a sale will produce the best financial return for council taxpayers? And the evidence suggests it doesn't. Witnesses from Don't Waste Buildings presented many examples where buildings initially viewed as liabilities became successful commercial and mixed-use schemes once the focus shifted from disposal to value creation. The group also heard examples such as Wigan and Swansea civic centres where partnership models delivered regeneration, commercial activity and private investment. We should remember that disposal provides a one-off capital receipt. A successful joint venture can provide both capital and risk-turning income. So I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm going to skip a little bit. We should also keep the figures in perspective. The 26-27 budget assumes a £7 million receipt from the sale of Shire Hall against council borrowing of almost 192 million. That would make only a modest difference, and in fact it would take the equivalent of 27 Shire Halls to eliminate the level of borrowing. 7 million is not going to solve our financial challenges, so we have an even greater responsibility to ensure that we obtain maximum value from the asset. And moreover, there's no guarantee that the expected receipt will be achieved. In a market where developers can pursue easier opportunities elsewhere because we don't have a 5-year land supply, we shouldn't assume that the sale will produce either the anticipated value or within the urgent timescale. The financially prudent approach is not to rush towards disposal because of financial pressure, but to establish the asset's value properly and test the market properly. So I ask you, please, can we look at doing that?
I've got Rob and then Dave.
Just a quick question. So you've listed a number of councils where they've done other things in creative ways. Did any of those councils, were any of those councils in a position where they weren't able to put any funding in themselves?
Sorry, so that
Were any of those councils in a position where they had no funding to put into that joint
I
venture?
don't know, because I haven't been
I think that's
involved
the
with those
fundamental
ones.
question we've got. Not only do we have no money to put in,
Yes.
but we've also got a £500,000 revenue cost annually. So it shifts us away from those positions. I get why we want to go in the direction you're suggesting, but it's difficult if we don't have money to put in, and they did.
This 500,000 thing keeps being tossed around, and recently it was much more than that, so it's come back to 500,000 again. You know, yet you are spending a huge amount of money on recruiting very expensive senior managers to this council to sort out other things, admittedly, but that comes out of the revenue budget as far as I understand. So you can afford certain things. It's a case of priorities on what you're going to afford. And one of the other examples I think I gave recently during the work that approximately £400,000 in revenue by allowing people to park free in the car park, staff and members park free in the car park. So why don't you stop that, and then you can use that money to run the Shire Hall? So it's a case of, there is money, it's a case of deciding what we're actually going to do with it, what's the important thing. That's what we're concerned about, really, that we are being honest about this, and that if there really is an opportunity to put some money in and do something that's sort of long-term, short-term pain, long-term gain, we should be looking at that.
Susan, I would love it to be the case that we can use EFS for doing these things. Unfortunately, that was all tied up in our bid to central government. The EFS is there for transformation. The senior staff that are being recruited are part of transformation, many of it. The chief exec will actually tell you exactly how most of that is funded. It is not out of any of that. It is not a choice. If we don't get some of that right, the rest of the organisation falls down because of the capacity and capability issues. So those are essentials, and I'm sure Tanya and then Duncan will explain exactly what we have to do about the EFS and how we have to cut back on that so that we don't end up paying as much interest, which is around 10%, because we have to pay back the capital as well, which really is a significant strain on our budget, because our council tax only raises 2 million on 1%, or just over that. So we are between a rock and a hard place on this. I think what we also need to realise is the options here around the recommendations allow a joint venture. I would love to see that building come forward. We just can't do it. We just can't do it. So if you can find a joint venture who's going to make this stack, we would be delighted, but it has to stack financially for us. Oh, Rosemary.
Very short question.
Very.
Well, I just wonder, a joint venture is a venture where parties invest together. Shropshire Council owns the asset. Could there not be a joint venture possible where the asset is what the council's equity in the project?
Only if all the risk is removed and also all of the revenue is removed, because we can't afford the risk or the revenue. So if I come to over the staffing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So a council of this size needs to have significant capacity in terms to lead it. Currently, we have one permanent chief exec and one permanent exec director. The rest of the senior team are either vacant or interim posts. That is a huge risk to this council, and a risk that has been highlighted to me as a chief exec from both MHCLG, from CIPFA, and from our external auditor, Grant Thornton. A key requirement moving forward is that I must at pace recruit to a senior team for Shropshire Council. On top of that, there's also going to be a key recommendation coming to me, which is around putting in the senior capacity around change and improvement. So one of the key posts that I've gone out to recruit, and the closing date was this weekend, was a corporate director for change and improvement, recognising the significant change and improvement this council needs to have to get us to that sustainable position. The majority of these posts that are currently out for advert and closed this weekend are from base budget establishment. The remaining posts are from the exceptional financial support in terms of transformation, which is purely acceptable by MHCLG.
Duncan.
I'd like to pick up on the point of the scale of the capital receipt, and anything positive is a good thing to this council, over and above the savings from the revenue account from disposing of the building. We, through the work that we're doing around the marketing of the site, will do all that we can to encourage the widest possible interest and to encourage the highest value. And that is either from a joint venture or from a developer or any agency who is interested in coming forward. And the fastest way to get joint ventures on the table and to be considered realistically, we believe, through it to be going to market directly. And that will really coax out those who are genuinely interested in what is, I'm sorry, captivated by the word exciting site moving forward, either through refurbishment or demolition. And I think through this report, we've done an awful lot actually to, I think as you're pointing out, Rosemary, to absorb the thinking of the Task and Finish group and all the thinking that's gone before and put it into a part where we can now move forward. The receipt will be lower, we suspect, than has been previously projected. I think the last valuation was about 4 years old, and the market has, we know, changed since then. But from a revenue point of view and from an EFS point of view, you're going to see, I hope, when we get back to the MTFP in the autumn, in November, you will see numbers in that report of £10,000, £15,000, £20,000, because the only way we can penetrate 90 million shortfall is accumulating a lot of small numbers. The big numbers are going to take probably years to surface through things like transformation of children's and adults. They're not going to arrive overnight. So we have to keep fighting for every penny. And I think the budget principles in the MTFP are treat every penny as if it's our own that we're spending in the council. So yes, it's maybe small, a marginal value, but it's an important one. And over and above that, it's the optics and rehearsal, if you like, from a lot more asset disposal that will have to happen over the next 3 or 4 years. And we'll see similarly small values coming through those. And we will also see some really emotionally difficult decisions to take, because some of these buildings will be buildings that we, under normal circumstances, would not want to lose.
Can I ask a question? I haven't asked the question yet. So you do know what the value is because you've had a recent valuation. And if we get only half of that, which is going to be substantially less than 7 million in the budget, what are you going to do? You know, if you only can get, if you put it up for sale and you get a buyer, but they're only going to give you half of that, what are you going to do? Are you going to just take what you can get, sort of thing, and try and find the rest from somewhere else?
The reality is we enter into negotiation. The reality is we enter into negotiation and try to work the number up. Yeah. And then we move to Plan B, and there'll be a number of Plan B options of things that we could do.
And what is one of those, for example? Have you got an idea of what a Plan B is, or are you just hoping Plan A is going to work?
Well, Plan B
So
could
I
be...
think, Duncan, we need to be careful, don't we, in terms of making sure that we don't, there'll be people watching this call thinking they might be able to give us like a £5 for the Shire Hall and get away with it. So I don't really want to enter this kind of debate today, because we will be going for the maximum price of Shire Hall.
Can I just give one option? Plan B might be to revert to the HRA, but that would be subject to the housing revenue account, as Duncan was speaking earlier. That would be subject to a lot of viability checks around the HRA for what is quite a complicated site. But that might be an option which I think is maybe worth considering, again, subject to viability.
I've got Alex and then Ruth.
Just for the Task and Finish, so both in the statement there and the Task and Finish report, a number of large civic centre regeneration schemes were mentioned. I just thought it would be useful to pull up some of the numbers. So the Swansea Civic Centre scheme was a £20 million government grant. The Wigan one was a £32 million government grant. They ran out of the first grant and then had to get Pride and Place lately to top it up. Newcastle, which appears in the Task and Finish report, was a £45 million loan taken on by the council. The Cambridgeshire projects, £50 million is earmarked for their Guildhall. If we go down to Plymouth, costs are at 51 million at the moment. And I think just for posterity, Falkirk are investing 62.5 million. So these are similar civic buildings built at a similar period referenced by the Task and Finish group. Is there a serious suggestion that those sort of numbers could be spent by Shropshire? Because they're big numbers and they're exclusively funded by either large external grants or by incredibly large loans, which we have no realistic prospect.
I think the thing is that we do understand the financial situation, but as I said before, it's sort of speculate to accumulate, if you like, or short-term pain, long-term gain, because of this building is very special in lots of ways. I say I didn't appreciate it, I do now, and trying to find ways of being able to produce some money. And I don't know, we've looked at grants before, but there may be other places that we could go. And it's a bitter pill to swallow also, to lose a building like that. Not just the building itself, but the potential of what it can be, because those projects are absolutely amazing and they satisfy a lot of our problems here. We need housing, we need health hubs, these sorts of things. We need those things. So it seems such a shame not to be able to find some money somehow to be able to do it, even though we know how difficult it is.
Ruth and then Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the Chief Executive's points around the staffing situation, but also to add that the previous administration, with an open voluntary redundancy programme, has literally hollowed out this organisation with some very key staff. Some of those posts that we are now recruiting to are statutory posts that we have to have by law. So I support the current recruitment process. It comes out of base budget and it is essential to move this organisation forward.
Thank you, Ruth. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the valuation question, whether it's red book value or whatever, I would say that's highly questionable. It's only going to have the value of whatever somebody's willing to pay for it. So fundamentally, by doing a prospectus and testing the market, we will at least crystallise what it is worth to somebody for X, Y or Z. And that will allow us to work out what its real value is, and then we can go then to look at the sort of things you've talked about. I've got no issue with any of the ideas that people have put forward at all. I mean, I suggested to the Lib Dem group in 2021 what they should do with the site and repurpose the site without selling it for housing at all. There's enough room on site to collapse the size of the footprint of the building, to have a new building and then dispose of the balance for houses afterwards without having to contemplate Pride Hill or come in here. But essentially, because we've got no money, we've got no seed corn to support a joint venture, we've got no money to support anything. Everything at the moment carries a massive risk for us as an authority, even if it's just putting in plan permission to get an uplift in the value. That the delay itself is a massive risk to this authority. The problem we've got, it's a bad market at the moment, but for all we know, it could get worse. And we know what happened when we bought shopping centres and what happened to the market then. And I argued at the time it was entirely predictable the way the market was going at the time. We shouldn't have entertained that. But we've gone from a position where we've had reserves in the 80s of millions to 5. That's not sustainable on any level. We've had undelivered savings for a decade that has the equivalent of the cumulative impact of that is over £100 million. It's really started the position of the council, and we've got no wiggle room, we've got no capacity to support anybody who wants to do something. So I would say, even if it's a joint venture, we can explore the capital asset as our part of a JV. But there's still a cost around all of that, as Heather said. So we've really got to mitigate every single penny of every cost and make as much money as we can. It's that difficult a position the council's in. But certainly in terms of the value, we just don't know what the value is until somebody says to us what they're prepared to pay for it.
I go back to what Duncan said, though. I feel that I know doing this prospectus, which I'm sure will take longer than you suggested, is delaying the decision again. Duncan said, you know, we've had 15 months and we're still here, the decision not being made. And the point I made was that because we've got no 5-year land supply, if you're hoping somebody's going to do this residential development, a housing developer can put in an application on any field in this county as long as it's connected to water and electricity. Why on earth would they buy Shire Hall with all the complexity and lack of really knowing what's going on? So the likelihood is you are not, you're not going to get a buyer, or if you do, it's going to be significantly less. And you haven't come up with any kind of plan B to say to us today. We can't wait 6 months for plan B, according to yourselves, because of the money situation. So we do seem to just be putting it off and putting it off all the time, really.
I think Duncan would like to come in. And you do know that Dave is a quantity surveyor, do you?
No, correction, I'm not a quantity surveyor.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I wasn't. And I've never been a quantity surveyor. I would be a lot wealthier if I was a quantity surveyor.
I've also had conversations with equally qualified people who told me what I've just said.
So Duncan will reply on all of that.
I'm sorry you think that this is delaying the process further, and I can't agree. I think this is a decisive decision that we're asking Cabinet to take here today that enables us to move on to the next point in a process. And as far as I'm concerned, as a statutory Section 151 officer, this is the approach that carries both the lowest risk and the best opportunity for the council. It leaves options open around developer versus joint venture against any other option. It enables for demolition or non-demolition. It moves us to a next point, and we're not going to know what that point is until we see submissions from the market who say what they want to do with that particular site. And so I can't agree it's delaying, I can't agree it's deferring. It's just naturally the place that we need to go next. And I know that is loaded with emotional overheads, but that's my view, and I think probably it's a view in Chris's report as well, which, as I say, I commissioned to confirm that my thinking was not that far adrift, and I think that's confirmed. And we've more recently had Cassandra join us in the place space, who I think is similarly positioned and comes with the same point of view in terms of the best way forward for the council, and therefore the best way forward for council residents.
Okay, right, I think we've come to the end of that little bit, and I now need to ask Chris Nolan to come to the table. He withdrew his question, so he's got a speaking role. Oh, sorry, Duncan. Do sit down. Duncan, will you have your bit to say?
Thank you for that. I thought I'd been usurped. I just wanted to respond a little bit to what Alex said, and picking up on Duncan's point about an HRA appropriation could be plan B. I think we need to understand that when Alex challenges where would the money come from, the HRA is not the council. Well, it is the council, but it has a completely separate set of finances. It's not affected by EFS. It's not affected by the pressures on the general fund. It has its own problems and issues, but the joy of the HRA is it can borrow money against rent income it will receive in the future. It does that all the time in building sites. So this is another potential site which offers us a stream of finance, which bizarrely is in the council, but not constrained by the general fund at all. And so I don't think that's been widely understood, perhaps by the public. I hope it's understood by the Cabinet, that this is an option where we could go forward at pace, because as the report says, it would be possible to put spades in the ground, they suggest, in 15 months. Maybe that's a bit optimistic, but there's no sale, there's no legal proceedings, there's none of that, and it's the housing revenue account that could take some of the costs in bringing this site to fruition, because it can then get the rental income. And I just think that's been a bit overlooked in this discussion so far. Thank you.
I think the important thing you just said in there, the housing revenue could make take some of the costs. Yeah, that's what you just said. I don't think it could take all of the costs, which is the issue.
I mean, that's a matter for the 151 officer to advise on. I also have to say this is about the council's priorities. We've been sadly lacking any discussion about what the council's priorities are on this key decision, and one of our priorities is to increase the supply of social housing to help people.
It
We deliver on it.
It is, but it's also not to empty the housing revenue account.
The HRA remains an option for part of the site or all of the site, but not at this stage. And I think you'll find in Chris Buss's report, he does set out actually that while the HRA is an option, it is probably not a viable one at the moment. Now we're doing some work around the HRA at the moment, but getting it into a better shape from an accountability point of view and a management point of view. So, and there's a Director of Housing indeed being appointed as part of the restructuring, which is a really important step, I think. But I would not discount it down the road, Duncan. I think it's part of our capacity issue as well at the moment. Have we got the capacity and capability to drive an HRA project through on the Shire Hall site? I don't think we have. So again, in terms of the risk bearing that would carry at this time, I'm not sure it's the right way forward. However, if we get to a point where we need to really think about it, I think it's really a good reminder.
Right, Chris.
Thank you all, and it's lunchtime, and rather than make a long speech, I will move, I hope fairly briskly, to a question or two. Duncan W will be very pleased to know that my presentation ends with, and don't we need a plan B? So we can skip the presentation, I think, in main, but that's, I think, looking for a bit of clarification and a bit of steer from Cabinet as they move forward to agree what I guess they're going to agree. I think that would be very helpful and reassuring to us. It's very easy in this meeting to say lots of nice things about this, that and the other, and or to have a go at each other, but actually a decision which comes out saying we're going direct to sale, ASAP, does not carry with it much commitment in terms of JVs, etc. And I guess that would be my question, and I will say a little bit more before stopping, but the question is really, in my mind, whether there's a reassurance that can be given that Plan B isn't going to be sequential, because Chris Buss, in his very helpful report and his online discussion with us, said it might take up to a year to complete a sale-ish, and not holding to that in the slightest, but that could very easily mean that in a year's time, MHCLG are on the phone and saying, this Shire Hall, didn't you say you were going to sell it? What's going on? And if it's only after an exhaustive process of trying to market that then other options are looked at, that seems to be wasting the time which other people here seem to be concerned about, and of course incurring ongoing running costs. I haven't been looking at that, but I'd better look at that, hadn't I? Ongoing running costs and loan finance costs. So my concern would strongly be that if we are seriously entertaining Plan B, that Plan B ought to be kicking off shortly. And in particular, in my mind, it's the joint venture option, just to see if it really is there, and if it is, then to explore it. And if it's not, then not to be holding it in reserve come a rainy day. And the challenge has come back from several Cabinet members and staff to say, well, you think this is a good idea, but we don't have the capacity to do much about it. And I totally sympathise with that, and suppose I would then say, well, could Cabinet then suggest a mechanism whereby the hardcore of the task and finish group, the remaining hardcore, might go out and talk to a few joint venture providers and see if we could do a bit of research on that. And then if we found one or two who said, yes, we'd love to come to talk, we don't like expecting to do lots of extra work, would anybody on staff or Cabinet actually sit down and talk to them? And last point, Rob, you asked about any examples of finance which hadn't come from councils. Well, of course, you'll love to know, or to be reminded of the fantastic Argent development north of King's Cross, and the shiny new Camden Town Hall, which was provided as part of that at no cost to the ratepayer. Can happen. Thank you.
In London.
Sorry.
Slightly different. Duncan.
I think the decision to go straight to disposal puts us in a very formal legal process as much as anything else in terms of the work that we have to do by way of preparation to get to a point where we have the prospectus and the way that we conduct ourselves with the market. I think you'll find in the joint venture space, the joint venture kind of organisations that we're talking here thrive on working first of all with elected members rather than with officers. And commitments get made to a point where officers are bound almost to move forward with the developer as the joint venturer as selected by the members, and that is not good governance. So I would recommend very strongly that we move along the track that we're moving. We go to market, we invite joint venturers. There will be soft market testing over the coming months where we will no doubt talk to developers and joint ventures about options moving forward and what they need to see in our documentation and what their preferences are as much as ours. So I think we move into a formal process, and I would advise very much against members becoming involved and engaged with potential suppliers. And I would say the same actually, Chris, for anything that we buy or sell.
Okay, I'll come to Cassandra in just a minute. Quickly, Chris.
I just wanted to say, I think that's very good advice, and of course take that, but it seems to me that different parts of the developer market work in different ways. And in one or two councils I've been involved with, I've seen property departments not looking widely enough and working hard enough at marketing opportunities like this. So I would strongly suggest that the different demands of marketing to this particular sector, the joint venture sector, are taken on board, and particular effort is made to do that.
I think that's extremely sound advice by return, Chris. And we need to ensure that when we get to the evaluation stage of this process, that we have the right skills in place to unlock the evaluation as much as anything else. Although finance will be the main priority, obviously, there have to be other considerations, don't there, about what comes with the offer. So that's quite a skilled process, and we will need to resource that.
Cassandra.
Thank you, Chair. So on the point around going to market and targeted marketing, absolutely. That's actually something that we should be doing as well. I'm going to come back to best consideration in terms of it being an open and transparent process, which is something that we have a regulatory requirement to do. So we can't only target specific developers, but if there are developers that the Task and Finish group has spoken to, or that others come forward and say, would you reach out to them? That's something that we should absolutely be doing and being more targeted in that respect. So absolutely. The second point I think that you raised, or the first point, was Plan B. We haven't gone to market with Shire Hall yet. We have had discussions independently, perhaps with developers and interested parties, but we haven't gone through a formal process of engaging the market. That is going to potentially give us information around what those Plan B options might be. That in and of itself is going to be a useful exercise, because the market will tell us what the appetite is, and there are things that we potentially haven't considered because we can't through the approach that we've taken. So is it going to run in parallel? It needs to, but it's also going to be iterative in terms of any response that we get back from the market.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we've now been in here for getting on for 3 hours. So, I've offered every elected member the chance to speak, but I would be grateful if it's on a new point, because otherwise if we're just going over the same ground, we're not going to actually have anything extra. So, does somebody have a new point they want to bring to the table?
Thank you very much, Chair. I do appreciate Councillor Quay touched on the matter, but I do promise this is a new point. So I visited the site back in May last year, and I've still got the same question running through my head of why now. Shire Hall was ruled surplus to requirement in February 2022 under the previous administration. Why has the active disposal only been looked at so late? Why was there an accelerated phased move, yet it appears that nothing has been done with the site, leaving it empty, causing alternative options to be lost? Ultimately, this has created the situation we face today. Why has the decision of sale of the building included on the site only been made now, and why has we been left in this position where the finances are basically chasing the decision being made today?
I think a lot of that's already been answered, but actually there are a whole range of things in that. Just to tell you, the order to leave Shire Hall was the 1st of November 24. That's when everybody was told they had to leave Shire Hall. It did not happen. People were still in there, and in fact, it's only recent, I think there's still 1 or 2 people there, because actually moving even the archives has proved very, very difficult. But it was the previous administration who made the decision in 22. They did nothing about emptying the building until November the 1st, 24. It was then incredibly slow. We took over in 25, May 25. We knew the finances and we knew all of this was really difficult. You have no idea how long it takes to get to the bottom of all of that, and we are still finding more and more that is incredibly difficult, and more of that will still be coming to Cabinet for us to learn lessons from, so that this council learns from it and never ever does them again. So in all of that, we also found that we had very few staff left, because anybody who wanted voluntary redundancy took it. Many of the departments lack capacity, really important departments. Finance, legal, Revs and Bens. Huge numbers of people had gone across the board. So the capacity to do this work had to be done sequentially. You can't do everything at once. And then on top of all of that, we had staff renewal, we had a number of things, we have a number of new people here now renewing the way we do various services. We have then MHCLG sending people in, SIPFA in to do in-depth look at our budget. On top of that, we have reviews of social care and its various forms. It all stops everything going on. We then brought it to council to make a final decision before we knew the absolute rock bottom of where we were. That decision was to dispose of the site, not because many of us wanted to do it, because we knew we had to do it. And it was the biggest decision I've made because, as I've said, I was really quite fond of the building, despite the fact that it was in a shocking condition. Many of the staff were either boiled or really frozen in it because none of the upkeep had been made. The upkeep in there was shocking, and towards the end, the building really wasn't a very nice place to be working in. I didn't like going in there towards the end. I loved the council chamber. It's much better than this. But we were where we were. So now we have a task and finish. We are now where we are. That is the reason we are where we are. SIPFA have spent a month here and more with us. We absolutely know where we were and what has happened in our budget all the way through. We have it from a really independent outside look on behalf of MHCLG. We knew all of this, but nobody wanted to believe it. We now have it in black and white, and I think Duncan will add to that.
Thanks, Heather. I mean, it's a really good question, and Zip asked us pretty much the same one, actually. It's how did that happen moment, and I can't unravel history. I suspect part of the problem was the Cornovi involvement, insofar as the original request to go to planning, I think, went to Cornovi, and there's probably a clue there that there may have been an intention, I can't speak for administration, there may have been an intention there to give the work then to Cornovi to build out housing on that site. In the middle of that period, though, money starts to drain out the system. Is the borrowing available for the council to lend to Cornovi to go and build housing? And the fact of the matter is the balances were eroding, the reserves were eroding, so the cupboard was becoming quite bare by way of investment. So I'm just guessing that was part of the delay in the process, and that's something we've got to pass over now and move on. But CIPFA were very aware of the history of this site, and they found it impossible, I think, to Tanya, you being asked the same questions. I think it's very difficult to unravel that part of the history and why the delays took place. It may have been, well, maybe the decision was taken at the time to go to demolition and build housing, but nothing happened. And I think it might have been a drain on resources that was part of the cause for that.
And just to add to that, we had never, ever any intention of using Cornovi. We were going to go out to the market.
Very, very quickly, you made a statement about the voluntary redundancy. Would I be correct in saying that the voluntary redundancy, because of the large quantity of it happening while at Shire Hall, meant that rather than knowledge being transferred from Shire Hall to Guildhall, effectively it had to be created from new inside Guildhall, which affected the actual time constraints?
Indirectly and directly, because if you have voluntary redundancy and you have no plan around much of it, you lose a lot of institutional knowledge and skills. So we've suffered from all of that, and it's not a great scene, and we've now got to recreate much of it, not only the way the organisation works and its culture and so on, but actually create the institutional knowledge again to take it forward. I don't know whether you've got any more to add to that.
Just to say, not just about VR, it's about a decision that was taken around a freeze on vacancy posts as well. So if you put both of that together, there's been a real loss of capacity and capability in the organisation, which we urgently need to rebuild to get us back into that sustainable council. And I guess, whilst I've got the microphone, if I may, and it does kind of respond partly to your question too, is that my strong advice as Chief Exec to Cabinet today is that we are not able to either to defer or to delay this decision today. As Chief Exec, I can't underestimate what's been said today by key officers in terms of the council's financial position, which I do appreciate all councillors do understand. I've had a meeting this morning at 9:30 of MHCLG. The leader and I have got a call very shortly again, and there will be a briefing out later today in terms of information that will come out tomorrow, which is currently embargoed, which puts laser focus on this decision today that this Cabinet does need to make.
Thank you very much.
So, have you got something new to add to all of this?
I think it might be new, I'm not sure.
Well, I will cut you short if it becomes not new. Thank you.
I took the opportunity of looking into the history of this development of the council over the last 10 years. And I think I sussed out the reason, and I was very interested in the motives for vacating the Shire Hall. And it appeared to me to be a commercial one in relation to the big town vision of 10 years ago. Well, that's collapsed completely, hasn't it? The relief road's gone, the regeneration of stalls, all the other peripheral stuff has pretty well stopped.
So the reasons for vacating the hall seem to have disappeared. But that one decision seems to have survived. Let's vacate the hall. Well, that's fine. My question is this, really. If we were to take external advice as to the current valuation, market valuation of the site, that's good. That's what we should be doing. But what about taking a practical look at refurbishing, not the kind of plan we had before from architects, which involved a gold-plated high-tech industrial chic version, but simply building to refurbish so that all the facilities work to the minimum legal requirements and no more. Then if we had that estimate, we'd be in a better position to make a more rational decision about the future of the hall. Because I suspect that the cost of that refurbishment would be much, much less, probably 5 million or maybe less. And then we'd have a functioning building, which is purpose-built, and would have at least 9,000 metres of useful space, as opposed to this building, which is only 4,000 metres of useful space, and which has a limited life. We all agree that it probably hasn't got a long-term future. So do we abandon the Shire Hall and look to spend 40 to 50 million pounds in a decade's time to replace it? Or do we take a serious look at refurbishing it? That's all.
Thank you. I don't know whether anybody, Alex?
I mean, I suppose in brief, I just think it's sums of money again. You know, there have been various costings for refurbishing Shire Hall, but many of them have been in the tens of millions. It sounds a lot, but I visited the new David Lloyd Centre in North Shrewsbury, which they'd spent over 11 million on. Jules recently redeveloped a pub in Shropshire. It cost well over £2 million. I mean, if redeveloping a pub is costing £2.5 million in the current climate, Shire Hall is an awful lot bigger and has an awful lot more requirements for staff to work. So I think it comes back to the same point. There is just not the money. We would have to borrow to spend huge amounts of money on it, when actually, as imperfect as this site is, we as a council are showing real signs of improvement whilst operating out of it, and also looking at making better use of both the Guildhall and alternatives. Why would we borrow money to spend on something internal which doesn't increase our capacity, doesn't increase our capability, and reduces our budget, especially in this market? As I say, you know, the relative cost of regeneration and refurbishment, I think £5 million for a building that size, you won't find anywhere in Britain where that comes close, I don't think.
Thank you. Only if it's really new, because I'm going to have to vacate this in a minute. And so is Tanya, because we have this meeting with MHCOG. So, yeah, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Cabinet. I'd just like to say thank you to you for allowing us to come here and speak. Really do appreciate it. On the turquoise side over there, we're in opposition, we know that. But we do appreciate the chance to be able to put our point forward. It's incumbent on us to scrutinise, not to oppose, or I suppose oppose, but not to object, not to stop you doing what you're doing, but it's incumbent on us to scrutinise. I've got a few words I'd like to put to you from my residence in St Martin's and the Oswestry area. There's very little of me in here, and I've cut out 3 paragraphs, so I won't be long, I promise you.
Please.
Yeah, it's very, very short. Whilst much of the debate around Shire Hall has understandably focused on costs, maintenance, liabilities, and future development opportunities, I'd like to briefly record the importance of the civic building itself and the architecture. It's my thing. As a young man, I can remember, this is a little bit about me, as a young man I can remember the Portland stone shining in the sun on the Lord Hills column above it, and it was on a day that you think we're going to watch Shrewsbury or something like that in the morning at the Gay Meadow, which we all remember. The Portland stone of that Shire Hall building is no ordinary building material. It's been used in some of Britain's most important public buildings. St Paul's, Buckingham Palace facade, the museum, British Museum, and of course the cenotaph. You remember how the cenotaph shines Shire Hall used to shine like that, and it could do again. From a heritage perspective, the question is not simply whether the building is old, but whether it is tells a part of Shrewsbury. Shire Hall undoubtedly does. It forms part of the wider civic landscape of Shrewsbury. And it sits alongside other important landmarks in Shropshire. Therefore, whatever decision the Cabinet ultimately reaches, I hope members will ensure that civic significance, architectural merit, heritage value, and public sentiment are considered alongside financial considerations. Residents would expect all of those factors to be weighed carefully before any irreversible decision is made. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for putting it that way. And aren't you glad the cenotaph is no longer the concrete or whatever it was before it fell to pieces and they put the stone in? And it hasn't since, because it's... Anyway, right, thank you very much. I think the recommendations, which are 2.1 to 2.13, are self-evident. I think the most important thing about all of this is that there are options on the table which don't mean automatic demolition. I think there's a huge piece of work for those people out there in the community who want to save Shire Hall to put something together with people to bring forward a scheme that would mean that it is used on site. But that will be up to you. We are in no position to do, as you have heard over and over again, and it is not necessarily what we want to do, it's what we have to do. And we will have to do with more and more as each cabinet comes up. We don't do any of this to be popular. We do this to make the council stable financially, because it's in everybody's interest that we deliver statutory services properly. So on those grounds, Roger has already moved.
And it was seconded
and
by
it was seconded by Alex. Can I now take it to a vote, please? Pardon? All the recommendations that are in the paper, 2.1 through to 2.13, there are a large number there, but it leaves all options on the table, actually, for other people to try and find a way forward.
Can I just say thank you to all those councillors and the members of the public who have contributed today. It has been a debate. Try to do it as open, but we're staying in with council procedural rules. But the Cabinet now proposing to make the decision, taking into consideration, and I know that executive directors who are here will also try and look at that in bringing forward the brochure, which we'll be looking at later on. But yeah.
Absolutely. On those grounds, can we then move to a vote, please? All those in favour? Which is unanimous. Thank you very much for all of that. And I am really grateful as well for members of the public. And I wish you luck, John. We've tried to put a and Jonathan to put a joint venture company together that stacks. Thank you very much. The date of our next meeting is the 5th of August.